As the sun began to set over the tranquil lake, a man stood frozen in horror. His sister lay lifeless at its edge, her body twisted and distorted by the weight of water. The once serene scene was now marked with a searing chill that pierced through his bones. The wind howled mournfully as it whipped around him, carrying away memories of their childhood days spent playing on the lake together. The man's heart pounded in his chest as he gazed out at the vast expanse of water below. It loomed like a dark cloud above them, its surface pulsing with an unquenchable energy that seemed to emanate from deep within. A sense of dread washed over him as he realized the full extent of their sister's suffering. In one swift motion, he lunged forward and grabbed onto her life jacket, yanking it up towards her body just enough to breathe in a few shallow breaths. He quickly pulled her into his arms, wrapping both hands around her chest before diving into the depths that had claimed her life. The water was cool and refreshing against his skin, providing him with some much-needed respite from the brutal cold. As he dove deeper, his body began to thrum with a primal energy that pulsed through his veins like an electric current. He felt as though his entire being was alive, every muscle and nerve tensing in preparation for the challenge ahead. With each passing moment, the water grew colder and more menacing, threatening to engulf him if he didn't act quickly. The man's mind raced with questions about justice and retribution, weighed against the weight of grief and pain that consumed his sister's life. Was it possible for revenge to be a form of just punishment, or was it simply another way of perpetuating violence? He knew deep down that his actions would have consequences beyond him, and that they could potentially destroy everything he cherished about their family. As he swam deeper into the water, the darkness grew more intense, casting an eerie glow on the twisted remains of her body. The man's mind became consumed by a sense of horror as he realized the full extent of the violence she had endured at the hands of his sister's killers. He couldn't believe that they would have done such a thing, using their power and authority to murder someone in cold blood. In one final desperate effort, the man reached out with both arms, grasping onto a small piece of debris floating on top of the water. He pulled it towards him, feeling as though he was diving into the past instead of the present moment. As his fingers touched against the rusted metal, he knew that they represented an essential link between their sister and the officers who had taken her life. With one last surge of energy, the man flung the debris at the water's surface, causing a sudden jolt as it shattered into pieces with a dull thud. The impact echoed through the lake, reverberating across his surroundings like a thunderous clap. He watched in awe as the fragments recombined and formed into something new, a symbol of their sister's sacrifice. The man felt a sense of relief wash over him as he realized that they had not avenged her death, but rather sought justice for themselves. It was a moment of profound clarity that shattered his understanding of what it meant to be vigilant and protect the innocent against those who would do harm. He knew that their journey towards vengeance wouldn't end here, but that it represented a new chapter in the story of racial injustice and systemic abuse. With renewed hope in his heart, he swam back out into the sunlight, feeling as though everything had been left behind for him to heal from. As he emerged onto the shore, he couldn't help but wonder if justice could truly bring closure to the hearts and minds of those who had lost so much, or whether it was simply a cruel game played by powerful forces in their pursuit of revenge. For the man knew that his sister's sacrifice would never be forgotten, not even after she was taken from him. The video's haunting footage served as a reminder of the devastating toll violence can take on individuals and communities, reminding viewers to question the morality of vengeance and strive for justice in all its forms. With this new understanding, he vowed to continue his journey towards peace and unity, using their sister's legacy as a beacon of hope and inspiration for others who might be lost at sea. Int. Lakeshore. Day. A solitary figure stands on the shore of a tranquil lake, gazing out into the vast expanse before him with a somber expression etched onto his face. His heart heavy with grief and anger, he has swum back out to claim what little remains of his sister's life, her body still cold and unresponsive in the water. /in. The man stands amidst the shimmering lake, his eyes fixed on an area where a body was once submerged. He takes a deep breath, trying to steel himself for whatever lies ahead, as he knows that this is not simply about finding his sister's remains or bringing them back home. It is about seeking justice and confronting the systemic issues at play in the world of policing and racism. As he surveys the lake, the man comes across an old wooden sign posted nearby. The words carved into its rusted surface read, "Justice for all." A simple yet powerful message that resonated with him more than any other piece of evidence he had found so far. He knows now that this was not just about finding his sister's body. It was also about confronting the systemic injustice and abuse faced by countless African American individuals who have lost their lives at the hands of biased law enforcement. With renewed determination, the man carefully retrieves a small black notebook from his pocket and begins jotting down notes on his findings. He delves into the footage he had seen earlier in the day, analyzing each frame with meticulous attention to detail. The video shows a group of police officers approaching a peaceful protester, guns drawn and faces covered. A young man named Michael is shown being dragged away by one of them, his cries for help drowned out as they carried him into an unmarked van. Intrigued, the man starts digging deeper into this incident, uncovering further details about Michael's life and background. He learns that he had always been a peaceful activist who was passionate about racial justice and equality. Unfortunately, despite his efforts to raise awareness among his community, he had become disillusioned with the system due to its unwillingness to take meaningful action against those in power. The man comes across an interview transcript of Michael's sister, Sarah, discussing her experiences growing up as a black woman during times of racial discrimination and police brutality. She describes how she was targeted by officers for simply being a difficult person who refused to comply with their orders or question the validity of their actions. Her testimony serves as a stark reminder that racism and prejudice are not only present in individual encounters, but they permeate every aspect of society. As he continues his investigation, the man comes across an article about a high-profile police officer named Onanya Dubois Omar Baker, who has been accused of covering up instances of racial profiling against black individuals. He discovers evidence linking Omar Baker to several cases where officers have targeted young men like Michael for their perceived deviance or willingness to challenge authority. Realizing that justice is not just about seeking revenge, but also addressing the root causes of systemic racism and police violence, the man decides to take action. He forms an alliance with a local community group called Black Lives Matter, whose mission is to raise awareness about these issues and advocate for change in law enforcement practices. Together, they work tirelessly to gather evidence against Omar Baker, including witness accounts from Michael's friends and family members, as well as testimonies from survivors of police brutality. They compile their findings into a comprehensive report that highlights the patterns of discrimination faced by African American individuals at the hands of biased law enforcement officers. When they submit this report to the City Council, they face backlash from powerful interests in power who fear public pressure would lead to changes within their department. However, the man and his allies refuse to back down, determined to shine a light on these issues and hold those responsible accountable for their actions. /in. The news of Omar Bakir's arrest is met with widespread condemnation and outrage by civil rights organizations, community leaders, and even some members of law enforcement agencies who recognize the systemic issues at play. However, as more evidence emerges against him, it becomes clear that justice is not an impossible dream, but rather a long-winded journey towards progress. The man continues to push for change within the police department, collaborating with local organizations and allies to develop new policies and strategies aimed at reducing racial profiling and increasing accountability among officers. He also advocates for greater transparency in investigations, encouraging departments to release more detailed footage of incidents involving Black individuals when possible. In addition to his work on the criminal justice reform front, the man becomes a vocal advocate for systemic changes within the broader society. He supports policies that promote diversity and inclusion, such as education programs aimed at addressing biases among police officers, hiring practices that prioritize racial diversity in their ranks, and community outreach initiatives aimed at fostering understanding between law enforcement agencies and marginalized communities. As his efforts continue to gain traction, the man begins to attract more allies who share his vision of a more just system. He becomes an unlikely hero, inspiring others with his bravery and dedication, as he works tirelessly to make real change in this often daunting landscape. /in. The community around Michael's sister grows increasingly supportive of the man and his cause, leading to widespread protests, rallies, and even legal action against law enforcement agencies that have engaged in racist practices. The media coverage surrounding Omar Bakir's arrest serves as a catalyst for further discussion about systemic racism and police brutality, highlighting the urgent need for change. The city council is forced to grapple with the fallout of this newfound attention, facing pressure from powerful interests who seek to maintain the status quo at all costs. However, the man refuses to be deterred by these setbacks, using his platform as a public figure to advocate for justice and raise awareness about the urgent need for reform. In the end, it is not just Michael's sister's sacrifice that serves as a wake-up call for change in this world of racial injustice and systemic oppression. It is also the collective courage and determination of those like him who refuse to let fear or prejudice hold them back from fighting for justice, inspiring countless others to join their cause and work towards building a more equitable society. As they continue their journey towards peace and unity, the man remains committed to using his sister's legacy as a beacon of hope and inspiration for all those lost along the way. With each passing day, he grows stronger in his determination to create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of race, ethnicity, or background. /in. The story concludes with the man standing at the edge of the lake once again, gazing out into the vast expanse before him. He knows that justice may not be complete yet, but he remains hopeful that one day it will bring a sense of closure to his sister's memory and transform the world around them for the better. The sun sets behind the horizon as the man takes in its warm glow, feeling grateful for the journey that has brought him here. With renewed determination, he swam back out into the water once again, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, with a heart full of hope and an unwavering commitment to creating a world where all individuals are treated equally and protected from harm by those who seek to exploit them. As he swims away, the man knows that his sister's memory will forever be intertwined in the fabric of justice, serving as a reminder for all who have experienced racism and discrimination, inspiring them to never give up on their fight for equality and freedom. In the aftermath of his sister's drowning, a man named Jack embarks on a relentless pursuit for justice. The shock and grief had left him emotionally raw and consumed by a deep-seated anger at the injustice that had taken place in their small town. As he stood at the edge of the tranquil lake once again, gazing out into its vast expanse before him, Jack knew that his sister's memory would forever be etched in his mind. He vowed to bring her back from the afterlife and confront those who were responsible for her death, not only as a grieving family, but also as an advocate for justice. With renewed determination and a fierce sense of purpose, Jack set out on a journey through time and space, seeking answers and allies along the way. His quest took him to various countries, each with its own unique challenges and obstacles that threatened his progress at Eve. Return. He met individuals from different walks of life who shared his vision for justice, including former police officers, activists, and even fellow survivors of discrimination. As he traveled deeper into history, Jack encountered a series of events that laid the groundwork for his mission's ultimate triumph. In France during World War II, he witnessed firsthand the brutal violence and atrocities committed by Nazi soldiers against innocent civilians. This experience left him deeply impacted and inspired to fight against injustice with all his might. In Japan in the 1950s, Jack encountered a group of government agents who were responsible for rounding up thousands of Japanese citizens during the Holocaust. He watched as their brutal methods led to the loss of countless lives, including children, women, and elderly individuals. This experience left him determined to expose these atrocities and bring them justice. In South Africa in 1980s, Jack witnessed firsthand the systemic racism that plagued his homeland. The apartheid system enforced segregation between races, leaving many people living in poverty, inadequate access to education, and limited job opportunities. He became an advocate for ending racial discrimination and working towards a more equitable society. Each of these experiences served as a catalyst for Jack's journey, inspiring him to become a force for change and justice wherever he went. His quest led him from the depths of his own heart to the halls of power where those in positions of authority held sway. In each country he visited, Jack encountered resistance at every turn, but he remained steadfast in his mission to bring about justice. He met people who were initially skeptical or resistant, but over time, their perspectives began to shift as they saw firsthand how their actions impacted others and the world around them. As he continued on his journey, Jack faced numerous obstacles and challenges that tested both his physical strength and emotional fortitude. He struggled with doubts and fears of failure, wondering if he would ever be able to achieve his goal of bringing his sister back from the afterlife. However, despite these setbacks, Jack refused to give up. He knew that his commitment to justice was unwavering and unyielding, no matter how much opposition he encountered along the way. He poured all of his energy into his quest, constantly pushing himself to learn more about the history, culture, and people affected by injustice. Finally, after years of traveling through time and space, Jack arrived at a bustling city in present-day China. This was where he would confront those responsible for her death head-on and bring them justice. As he stepped into the heart of the city, Jack felt the energy and excitement building around him. He knew that this moment was crucial to bringing about change and creating a world where all individuals were treated equally and protected from harm by those who sought to exploit them. He met with various individuals at different levels within the government, including high-ranking officials, activists, and even ordinary citizens. They shared their experiences of discrimination and injustice, discussing strategies for addressing these issues and bringing about lasting change. Through his conversations, Jack uncovered a complex web of corruption, conspiracy, and greed that threatened to undermine efforts towards equality and justice. He faced resistance from those who sought to maintain the status quo, but he remained determined not only to expose their wrongdoings, but also to work together with others to create real changes. With each revelation, Jack's resolve grew stronger. He knew that his sister's memory would forever be a source of inspiration for all who seek justice and equality, serving as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for change and progress. In the end, it was not an easy path to take, but Jack emerged from his journey with renewed determination and a commitment to creating a world where everyone's rights were respected and protected. He faced countless challenges along the way, including personal setbacks and emotional tolls, but he remained steadfast in his pursuit of justice. As he stood before those responsible for her death, Jack knew that it was time to take action. With renewed strength and a laser focus on the future, he delivered a powerful speech, calling upon them to face their responsibilities towards the victims of injustice and work together to create a more equitable society. His words resonated with those in attendance, inspiring a wave of applause as they listened intently to his message of hope and determination. As Jack left the city that had once been marked by darkness and oppression, he knew that his journey was just beginning, but it was one filled with countless possibilities for creating a world where justice reigns supreme. The global outline. Asterisk. In the small town of Millfield, a grieving man named Jack is haunted by the memory of his sister's death. Her murder was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a larger systemic issue that had long plagued the community. Asterisk. The police officers responsible for her drowning are still at large, and their callous actions have left many in the town feeling disillusioned and angry. Asterisk. As Jack tries to come to terms with his loss, he becomes determined to seek justice for his sister's death. He begins by researching the case thoroughly, gathering information about any leads or evidence that could help him bring the officers to book. Asterisk. Despite facing numerous obstacles along the way, including personal setbacks and emotional tolls, Jack remains steadfast in his pursuit of justice. He reaches out to local community leaders and organizations, hoping to gain their support and assistance in uncovering the truth. Asterisk. One day, Jack receives a mysterious letter from an anonymous source that details the events leading up to her murder. The letter reveals that the police officers involved were aware of the danger posed by the town's wealthy land developer, who had long been working behind the scenes to undermine the community and control its resources. Asterisk. With this newfound information, Jack sets out on a dangerous mission to gather evidence and expose the truth about the conspiracy. He embarks on a quest through the rugged terrain of Millfield, using his detective skills and physical strength to track down key witnesses and collect clues that could help him bring the officers to justice. Asterisk. Along the way, Jack encounters various obstacles and challenges, including dangerous criminals, treacherous terrain, and unexpected twists and turns. But with each obstacle he overcomes, he becomes more determined to succeed in his mission. Asterisk. As he delves deeper into the conspiracy, Jack discovers that not only was there a cover-up involving the police officers, but also a larger-scale plot by an influential figure who sought to use the power of government officials and the town's wealth for their own gain. Asterisk. With this shocking revelation, Jack realizes that his sister's death was just one in a long series of injustices committed against her community. The land developer had been manipulating them all for years, using their resources to control the lives of everyone who worked or lived in Millfield and furthering their agenda. Asterisk. As he uncovers the truth about the conspiracy, Jack becomes determined to take action against those responsible. He reaches out to local elected officials, urging them to hold the land developer accountable for his actions and put an end to this reign of terror. The town's residents are initially resistant to Jack's demands for justice, but as they see him standing up for their rights and demanding accountability, they begin to demand change. They organize protests, rallies, and other forms of civil disobedience to pressure the government officials into taking action against the land developer. As the conflict between Jack and the town residents escalates, he finds himself at odds with many of his former colleagues in law enforcement who are loyal only to the interests of their superiors. But as more evidence emerges about the conspiracy, these officers begin to question their own involvement and come to realize that they too were part of a larger plan. In an intense final showdown, Jack confronts the land developer and exposes his true intentions. The confrontation takes place in front of a packed town hall, with residents from all walks of life united behind him to demand justice for their community. Despite facing overwhelming opposition, Jack delivers a powerful speech that resonates with everyone present. He calls upon them to stand together against the land developer and work towards creating a more equitable society where everyone's rights are respected and protected. In the end, the town of Millfield is changed forever as residents come together to demand change and hold those responsible accountable for their actions. The police officers responsible for Jack's sister's death are arrested, while the corrupt land developer is brought to justice. Jack emerges from this harrowing tale with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. He knows that his journey has only just begun, but he vows to continue fighting for justice in every community he encounters. As he walks away from Millfield, surrounded by cheering residents and grateful supporters, Jack knows that the fight for equality and human rights is far from over. Jack. Oh. In this gripping tale, a grieving man named Jack embarks on an unwavering mission of justice after a group of deeply ingrained police officers callously drown his sister in the peaceful waters of Millfield Lake. The community comes together to demand accountability and reform from those responsible for her untimely death. Despite facing overwhelming opposition, Jack delivers a powerful speech that resonates with every person present. He calls upon them to stand together against the land developer who sought their approval to build an upscale development in the town's heartland. "We cannot continue living like this," he declares, his voice shaking as tears fall down his face. "Our community is not safe anymore." The police officers responsible for Jack's sister's death are arrested on suspicion of gross negligence and malpractice. One by one, their names are made public, exposing the corruption within the department. The town of Millfield erupts into chaos, with residents demanding answers from law enforcement. A peaceful protest is organized in front of the police station, where Jack addresses the gathered community members directly. "We deserve justice," he asserts, his voice echoing through the crowd. "Our sister was taken away too soon, and we demand to know what happened." As they wait for their voices to be heard, a group of local activists emerges from the shadows, armed with signs and posters demanding change. The community leaders join forces, uniting behind Jack's message and emboldened by his courage. They call upon everyone in Millfield to come together, regardless of race, gender, or social status, as they fight for justice against a corrupt system that has long been perpetuating inequality and injustice. "We cannot stand idly by while our community is torn apart," declares one of the leaders, her voice shaking with determination. Jack rallies the crowd, emphasizing their need to take action before it's too late. He shares stories of other victims who have faced similar circumstances, highlighting how police officers' actions can lead to tragic outcomes for innocent people. Our sister was just a young woman trying to make a better life for herself and her family, he says, tears streaming down his face as he speaks. Her death should not be an isolated incident. It's happening in every community across the country. The conversation turns towards systemic changes needed within law enforcement agencies. Jack outlines specific reforms that could address the issues of police brutality, racial profiling, and inadequate training for officers. He calls on town council members to support new policies and programs aimed at enhancing transparency, accountability, and community engagement among law enforcement officials. As the evening wears on, a crucial meeting takes place between Jack, local activists, and community leaders in the town's hall. A group of key stakeholders present, including representatives from the police department, school districts, and advocacy groups, discuss their concerns and proposals for change. The conversation becomes tense as each side tries to assert its position while acknowledging the need for a collaborative approach. Despite these challenges, Jack remains steadfast in his commitment to justice. He explains that every victim matters, no matter how insignificant they may seem on the surface. We cannot let this tragedy happen again, he declares, his voice ringing out with conviction. Our sister's death was preventable if only those responsible were held accountable for their actions. In a stroke of brilliance, Jack proposes an idea, a community-led task force tasked with investigating and holding police officers who abuse power accountable. His group would consist of local residents, law enforcement officials, and other relevant stakeholders to ensure that justice is served swiftly and effectively. The proposal garners widespread support from the town's residents, who see it as a necessary step towards rectifying the injustices in their community. The task force begins its work immediately, with Jack leading the charge alongside fellow activists and local leaders. As the weeks go by, progress is made, and more information emerges about the police officers responsible for Jack's sister's death. They are held accountable through thorough investigations, resulting in convictions or charges of misconduct. In addition, several town officials face consequences for their role in covering up evidence against those accused. The community comes together to celebrate the victories achieved by the task force, acknowledging its invaluable contribution towards bringing justice to the victims and holding law enforcement officers accountable for their actions. A massive rally is organized, with residents from all walks of life united behind Jack's message. Jack delivers a powerful speech at the rally, emphasizing that change cannot be accomplished overnight, but must begin with small steps. Our sister was taken away too soon, he says, tears streaming down his face as he speaks to the gathered crowd. We need each other's support and determination in this fight for justice. We can't let anyone else suffer like her. The rally ends with a call to action from Jack, urging residents to take action within their communities and advocate for change at all levels of government. He explains that every voice counts, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem on the surface. As the months pass, progress continues, as more incidents are brought forward involving police misconduct. The task force's work is recognized by local authorities, who begin to implement new policies and training programs aimed at improving law enforcement practices. The community rallies once again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose and determination. They see it not just an end, but also a beginning towards creating a more equitable society where everyone's rights are respected and protected. A series of town hall meetings are held, featuring local officials, police department leaders, and other stakeholders discussing the progress made so far. As Jack stands at the podium during one of these sessions, he looks out into the audience, tears streaming down his face as he speaks about the enduring impact of her sister's death on their community. "We must not let this tragedy be a distant memory," he says, his voice ringing out with conviction. In an inspiring speech, Jack shares stories from other victims who have faced similar circumstances and inspires others to join forces in demanding justice for all. He emphasizes that change is not just about punishing the perpetrators, but also creating a culture of accountability within law enforcement agencies. The town's leaders lead by example, implementing new policies and programs aimed at reducing police brutality, racial profiling, and improving community engagement among officers. The task force continues its work tirelessly, gathering more evidence to support their calls for change. With each passing day, the impact of Jack's sister's death becomes clearer. Police misconduct rates decline, and the town begins to see a reduction in violent incidents. Residents' trust in law enforcement is restored, and community engagement levels increase. In addition to these changes, there are also significant improvements made in the school district where one of Jack's sisters attended. The implementation of new policies and programs aimed at reducing disciplinary actions for students involved in disruptive behavior leads to a decrease in suspensions and detentions. This not only benefits individual students, but also creates an environment that fosters learning and respect within the community. As the story concludes, Jack looks back on his journey with pride and satisfaction. He knows that justice has been served, but there is still much work left to be done. "Our sister's death was preventable," he says, tears streaming down his face as he speaks to the gathered crowd. "We must not let anyone else suffer like her." The town of Millfield remains committed to promoting equality and human rights, with a renewed sense of purpose and determination that extends bay. On the case involving Jack's sister's death, the task force's work continues, driving towards creating a safer community where every person is treated with dignity and respect. In this long, continuous narrative, we have followed the global outline for a harrowing tale about a grieving man who embarks on an unyielding mission of vengeance against a group of deeply ingrained police officers who callously drown his sister in Millfield Lake. The community comes together to demand justice for their community and work towards creating a more equitable society where everyone's rights are respected and protected. The story starts with the death of Jack's sister, which shakes the town to its core as residents rally behind her message of justice. The police officers responsible for her untimely death are arrested on suspicion of gross negligence and malpractice, but their actions continue to undermine trust in law enforcement and perpetuate inequality. Jack delivers a powerful speech that resonates with everyone present, calling upon them to stand together against the land developer who sought approval to build an upscale development in the town's heartland. He calls for change within law enforcement agencies and proposes a community-led task force tasked with investigating and holding police officers accountable for their actions. The proposal garners widespread support from the town's residents, who see it as a necessary step towards rectifying the injustices in their community. As progress is made, more information emerges about the police officers responsible for Jack's sister's death, resulting in convictions or charges of misconduct. In addition to these changes, there are also significant improvements made in the school district where one of Jack's sisters attended. The implementation of new policies and programs aimed at reducing disciplinary actions for students involved in disruptive behavior leads to a decrease in suspensions and detentions. This not only benefits individual students, but also creates an environment that fosters learning and respect within the community. The story ends with Jack looking back on his journey with pride and satisfaction, knowing that justice has been served, but there is still much work left to be. Kurt Raince. District 1. Glenn Rains. 2. Daniel Freeman. DNA. And 3. 4. District 5. District 1. In this harrowing tale, a grieving man embarks on a chilling mission of vengeance after a group of bigoted police officers callously drown his sister in a tranquil lake. 2. The proposal garners widespread support from the town's residents, who see it as a necessary step towards rectifying the injustices in their community. As progress is made, more information emerges about the police officers responsible for Jack's sister's death, resulting in convictions or charges of misconduct. In addition to these changes, there are also significant improvements made in the school district where one of Jack's sisters attended. 3. The implementation of new policies and programs aimed at reducing disciplinary actions for students involved in disruptive behavior leads to a decrease in suspensions and detentions. This not only benefits individual students, but also creates an environment that fosters learning and respect within the community. The story ends with Jack looking back on his journey with pride and satisfaction, knowing that justice has been served, but there is still much work left to be done. 4. In 1967, Glenn Rains was a police officer in the small town of Millfield, Illinois. He had worked for the department since he was just 23 years old, during which time he had seen countless cases where innocent people were wrongfully accused or murdered by members of the law enforcement force. 5. The brutal killing of Jack's sister, Emily, left Glenn devastated and consumed with grief. Her lifeless body was found in a peaceful lake on June 19, 1968, after her family had arranged for her to be cremated following her funeral. It was an act that would forever haunt him. Glenn knew he couldn't let this tragedy rest unanswered. He decided to take matters into his own hands and seek revenge against the police officers responsible. The community rallied around Glenn's cause, with many residents believing in his bravery and dedication to justice. 6. As word spread about Glenn's vendetta, the local newspaper published an article detailing his plans for a public ceremony of sorts that would serve as a form of protest. He had gathered together a group of fellow officers from across town who shared his vision and were eager to take action against those responsible for Emily's death. 7. The day finally arrived. On July 14, 1968, Glenn led a large crowd in a peaceful march through the streets of Millfield. They sang songs about justice, marched down Main Street, and demanded that the police department be held accountable for their actions. As they approached the town hall building, Glenn spotted several members of the force standing outside, including Chief Ananya Du Bois Malik Nyberg, Officer James J. Miller, and Detective Paul Pete Thompson. The officers looked intimidated by Glenn's presence, but refused to back down from their duties. 8. Inside the town hall, a tense meeting was taking place between Glenn and Chief Malik Nyberg. Glenn presented his evidence against each officer in detail, detailing how they had called Emily into custody without proper authorization or probable cause. He also shared stories of witnesses who could attest to their misconduct, including Officer Miller's unwavering adherence to protocol and Detective Thompson's tendency to jump to conclusions based on initial reports. 9. Chief Malik Nyberg listened carefully to Glenn's arguments, nodding his head at some points, but firmly stating that they were entitled to due process under the law. He acknowledged that there had been instances where police officers may have made mistakes in their duties, but he argued that these incidents should not be condoned and must be addressed. 10. Officer Miller stood up from his seat, feeling defensive as Glenn continued to present evidence of misconduct. "We can't just sweep this under the rug," he said, raising an eyebrow. Emily's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't your fault. You were following proper protocols and making informed decisions based on the information at hand. Glenn replied with calmness, reminding Officer Miller that Emily had been innocent until proven guilty in court. He explained how the police department followed procedures such as warrantless searches, excessive force, and violation of Fourth Amendment rights during their investigation. 11. Detective Thompson stood up next to Glenn, his face red with anger and frustration. But what about all those other cases where you were called on duty? You didn't hesitate to use deadly force against innocent suspects, he said, pointing towards the room's walls where several bodies lay motionless in a pool of blood. Glenn replied that they had followed every procedure in place at the time and believed there was no reason for them to intervene. He shared examples of cases involving people who were not armed or facing imminent danger when police officers responded, emphasizing the importance of proper training and decision-making under stressful situations. 12. Chief Malik Nyberg eventually agreed with Glenn's arguments, acknowledging that they had acted in a way that could be perceived as excessive by some. "We understand your frustration," he said, folding his hands over his chest. "But we need to ensure that our officers are held accountable for their actions and not allowed to operate without proper oversight." 13. Following the meeting with Chief Malik Nyberg, Glenn was arrested on a charge of obstruction of justice under Illinois law. He faced numerous charges against Officer Miller, Detective Thompson, and several other police officials involved in Emily's death. 14. The trial lasted months, with Glenn presenting his case to a jury that included community members from Millfield as well as the local media. The jury heard evidence about officer misconduct, including the lack of proper training on Fourth Amendment rights, excessive force during traffic stops, and instances where police officers ignored warning signs or called for backup when faced with imminent danger. 15. In court, Glenn's arguments were supported by multiple witnesses who could attest to his actions under stressful conditions. The prosecution presented evidence that Officer Miller had made decisions based solely on the initial reports provided by other officers without verifying their accuracy. Detective Thompson was found guilty of violating Emily's Fourth Amendment rights, while Officer Miller and Detective T.H. Thompson both received suspended sentences. 16. Glenn's conviction brought justice for Emily's family and community, but it also highlighted the need for greater accountability within law enforcement agencies. The town implemented several reforms aimed at improving officer training, reducing excessive force incidents, and addressing instances of bias and misconduct in their departments. 17. In 1985, Glenn Rains was awarded a civil rights lawsuit that ultimately led to his acquittal from all charges against him. He became an advocate for police accountability and worked with other victims' families who had been impacted by the department's actions during Emily's death. 18. The story ends on a note of forgiveness and closure for Glenn, acknowledging that justice was served, but also recognizing the ongoing work needed to ensure fairness and integrity in law enforcement practices across the country. The novel continues as Glenn looks back on his journey with pride and satisfaction, knowing that he has brought attention to an issue that had haunted him for decades. The community has changed since Emily's death, with increased transparency and accountability within police departments nationwide. As Glenn reflects on this chapter of his life, he knows that the fight against injustice is far from over, but at least one person's dedication and perseverance have sparked a positive change in his hometown. 1. In 2016, a grieving man named Johnny Williams embarks on a chilling mission of vengeance after his sister Emily was murdered by an all-white police force in rural Alabama. The story opens with officer training, an intense and rigorous training program aimed at reducing excessive use of force incidents and addressing instances of bias and misconduct within the police department. It's clear from the outset that Johnny, a veteran officer who had lost his wife to similar circumstances just 2 years prior, is deeply troubled by what he has seen during Emily's death. The novel delves into Officer Glenn Rains, one of the victims' families whose life was shattered by the department's actions. After receiving an award for civil rights litigation and becoming an advocate for police accountability, Johnny becomes determined to bring justice to his sister's case through a peaceful protest. 17. In 2018, Glenn is appointed as the district attorney in Emily's hometown, where he takes on the task of investigating her murder and bringing charges against the all-white police force. The novel begins with Johnny meticulously reviewing every piece of evidence, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing surveillance footage to build a case. As the investigation unfolds, Johnny uncovers inconsistencies within the department's policies and procedures regarding racial profiling, excessive use of force, and the handling of minority cases. He realizes that systemic racism is deeply ingrained in the ranks of law enforcement, and he begins to question whether justice can truly be served without addressing these underlying issues. 18. The novel explores Johnny's personal journey as a father trying to raise his daughter on his own while struggling with feelings of grief, anger, and disillusionment with the police force that had killed her sister. He seeks solace in reading books about other victims' families who have been affected by similar cases, connecting with others who are fighting for change. 19. Alongside the investigation, Johnny works tirelessly to raise awareness about the issue of racial profiling and excessive use of force within law enforcement. He organizes rallies, speaks at local colleges, and engages in conversations with community leaders, advocating for police reform and highlighting the need for transparency and accountability. 20. In a stunning turn of events, an anonymous tip leads Johnny to witness a confrontation between 2 white officers who had been involved in Emily's death. The footage captures the moment when one officer uses excessive force against an unarmed black man, resulting in his arrest, but sparking outrage within the community and leading to further investigations. 21. As Johnny pieces together the events that led up to the encounter with the white police officers, he discovers a pattern of racial bias and misconduct among the department's top brass, including high-ranking officials who have maintained their positions despite evidence of wrongdoing. This revelation fuels his determination to bring about real change in law enforcement practices. 22. The novel reaches its climax as Johnny presents his findings to the district attorney and local police chief, demanding a full investigation into the department's disciplinary actions against the white officers involved in Emily's death. He demands that they face criminal charges for their misconduct and faces community backlash for ignoring an obvious instance of racial injustice. 23. The novel culminates with Johnny receiving widespread media coverage and national recognition as he exposes the systemic racism within law enforcement, inspiring a movement to reform policies and practices across the country. His advocacy becomes a symbol of hope for victims' families who have been left shattered by police violence and calls for justice without any hesitation. 24. As the novel concludes, Johnny reflects on his journey as he continues fighting against injustice in law enforcement, knowing that change is not an easy task, but one that requires persistence, courage, and unwavering determination. He remains committed to using his platform to raise awareness about racial profiling and police misconduct, and serves as a shining example of how even the smallest individual actions can have a significant impact on society. Task: continue the story seamlessly. Johnny Williams continues his journey as he faces challenges in bringing justice to Emily's death, while also advocating for systemic change within law enforcement. The novel unfolds with him leading a movement, calling for transparency and accountability in officer training and disciplinary practices, working alongside community leaders, and exposing racial bias and misconduct among the department's top brass. As Johnny continues his efforts, he remains committed to maintaining his commitment to justice while navigating the complexities of police culture within his hometown. He is met with resistance from those who believe that addressing systemic issues will not solve the problem, but Johnny refuses to back down. With the help of community leaders and local residents, Johnny rallies for a peaceful protest against excessive use of force by white officers in their jurisdiction, demanding accountability and highlighting the need for racial justice. The protests turn violent when police respond with tear gas, resulting in injuries to both protesters and law enforcement personnel. Johnny's resilience is tested as he faces backlash from his community, including criticism and even threats towards him and those involved in the movement. He remains steadfast in his commitment to bringing about change, knowing that silence only perpetuates a cycle of injustice and violence within his hometown. In addition to addressing the issue of racial bias, Johnny also focuses on educating law enforcement officers and others about implicit biases and how they can be unintentionally perpetuated through their actions and behaviors. He uses workshops, seminars, and other forms of education to train police departments across the country on best practices for handling minority cases and reducing excessive use of force. The novel reaches a turning point as Johnny receives an unexpected ally in the form of a young black man named Marcus, who becomes deeply involved with his movement after witnessing Emily's death firsthand. Marcus is passionate about addressing systemic racism within law enforcement and shares Johnny's commitment to bringing justice to all victims of police violence. Together, Johnny and Marcus launch a new initiative aimed at fostering dialogue between police departments across the country, promoting accountability for misconduct and encouraging officers to engage in more culturally sensitive interactions with marginalized communities. They organize workshops on implicit bias training, community policing strategies, and other relevant topics that help shift perspectives and promote understanding among law enforcement professionals. The novel reaches its climax as Johnny's movement gains momentum, with police departments across the country taking notice of their own failings and implementing changes to address racial profiling and excessive use of force. The department in Emily's hometown becomes a shining example of what can be achieved when community members come together to demand change and hold law enforcement accountable. As Johnny reflects on his journey, he knows that justice is not an easy task, but one that requires ongoing commitment, perseverance, and the unwavering belief that every individual has the power to make a difference. He remains determined to continue fighting for racial equality within law enforcement, knowing that by addressing systemic issues and promoting transparency and accountability, he can help create a safer, more just society where all victims of police violence have access to justice. In the heart of a small town, Emily stood at the edge of her beloved lake, gazing out over the serene waters. It was early morning on a crisp autumn day, and she felt a sense of peace wash over her as she looked upon the tranquil scene before her. She had lost her older sister, Johnny, to a police officer's cruel act that took place during an unprovoked stop at their home. The incident left Emily shattered, with a deep longing for justice and finding closure and understanding. As news of her sister's death spread throughout town, the community rallied around Johnny's memory, organizing events and protests demanding accountability from law enforcement officials responsible for his lifeless body. A group of local activists called Community Empowerment, led by Emily herself, gathered to discuss ways to bring change to their city's policing practices. Emily began attending workshops on implicit bias training, which were designed to raise awareness about the harmful effects of racial profiling and excessive use of force in law enforcement interactions. She found that these sessions not only helped her understand the root causes, but also provided practical tools for addressing biases within her own work as a police officer. The lessons taught by the trainers resonated deeply with Emily, who believed it was essential to approach each encounter with empathy and understanding. The town's local council convened an audience of law enforcement officers, including those directly responsible for Johnny's death, to discuss their policies and practices in light of these workshops' findings. They acknowledged that there had been instances where race played a role in the officer-involved shooting, but they also expressed commitment to addressing any biases and ensuring accountability. The council decided to create an independent task force consisting of community members, law enforcement officers, advocates, and experts from various fields to investigate Johnny's death comprehensively. The team began by reviewing department policies related to racial profiling, including the use of race as a factor in determining whether someone was likely to engage in criminal activity. They also examined police training materials that were available to officers and reviewed existing protocols for de-escalation techniques. The task force found numerous areas where law enforcement agencies could improve their interactions with marginalized communities. They identified instances where officer behavior was perceived as discriminatory, such as the use of excessive force against individuals based on their race or ethnicity. The team recommended implementing changes in training materials to ensure that officers understand and are equipped to handle situations involving people from diverse backgrounds. In addition, they advocated for a cultural shift within law enforcement departments by promoting community policing strategies. They suggested establishing partnerships with local organizations that served marginalized communities, such as churches, nonprofits, and community centers, to provide support, resources, and training for police officers. The task force also encouraged the development of implicit bias workshops and trainings for all personnel, including those in administrative positions. The council's decision was met with widespread applause from town residents who supported the task force recommendations. Emily became a symbol of hope within her community as she continued to advocate for change at every turn. She organized events such as rallies, panel discussions, and town hall meetings, where attendees shared their stories and experiences related to Johnny's death. As word of her efforts spread, other police departments across the country began implementing changes in their own policies and practices. Some agencies implemented racial bias training for officers, while others established community policing teams that worked closely with local organizations to address social issues affecting marginalized communities. One department, called Police Empowerment, became a shining example of what could be achieved when community members came together to demand change. The organization had successfully brought about cultural shifts within the police force and encouraged officer accountability through workshops and public awareness campaigns. The success of Emily's movement inspired others in her town to join forces and create similar initiatives, leading to the formation of several local chapters and online forums dedicated to racial justice issues within law enforcement agencies. These groups provided support, resources, and networking opportunities for individuals who had been affected by police violence or wanted to learn more about best practices in addressing systemic challenges. As Johnny's memory lived on, his legacy became a beacon of hope, inspiring others to fight against injustice and demand change from those in power. The town continued its efforts towards racial equality, with the council adopting new policies and procedures that prioritize community policing and implicit bias training for all law enforcement personnel. In the aftermath of her sister's death, Emily knew that justice was not an easy task, but one that required ongoing commitment, perseverance, and the unwavering belief that every individual has the power to make a difference. She remained determined to continue fighting for racial equality within law enforcement, knowing that by addressing systemic issues and promoting transparency and accountability, she could help create a safer, more just society where all victims of police violence have access to justice. As Johnny's story unfolded over time, it became an inspiration for generations of individuals who sought justice in their own lives. The legacy of Emily continued to grow, with countless people joining her movement, advocating for change, and working towards creating a world that prioritizes the rights and well-being of all citizens, regardless of race or ethnicity. EXT, Rural Town. Day the sun rises over the serene countryside, casting a warm glow across the lush green fields and sparkling streams that snake through the dense forests. Emily's heart is heavy with sadness as she walks along the winding dirt path towards her childhood home, memories of her sister's life flooding back. Int. Church. Day Emily steps inside the small church where Johnny used to attend religious services every Sunday morning. The familiar scent of incense fills the air, and a group of worshippers are gathered around the altar, their faces solemn yet determined. Eleanor. To an elder, Father, we come together today with great sorrow for the passing of our beloved sister, Johnny. As you may know, she was a kind-hearted woman who dedicated her life to fighting against injustice and demanding change from those in power. Jackson. Yes, my dear, and I can only imagine how much pain her family must be enduring after losing such an innocent soul. The congregation nods, their eyes fixated on Emily. Emily takes a deep breath before continuing. Johnny was a dedicated community activist who worked tirelessly to promote racial equality within law enforcement. She believed that every individual has the power to make a difference and fought for justice in all forms, from protests and sit-ins to letters to elected officials. As she speaks, Emily's voice echoes through the church, carrying the weight of her sister's legacy. The congregation listens intently as she shares Johnny's story. INT. Police station. Day Emily is sitting at a desk surrounded by stacks of reports, emails, and files that document Johnny's life and contributions to the community. Her hands tremble slightly, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. Emily, I'm processing all the information I've gathered about this case, she says, taking a deep breath before continuing. Johnny was known for her unwavering commitment to justice, particularly in cases involving police brutality and racial profiling. She pulls out a photo album, flipping through its pages with growing intensity. One of them catches Johnny standing on the steps of a city hall, her arms raised triumphantly as she faces off against a group of officers who had brutalized an innocent black man. INT. Police station. Day Emily continues to recount Johnny's journey, detailing how she tirelessly advocated for policy changes within law enforcement agencies and worked with local community organizations to combat racial bias in the police force. She recounts instances where her sister confronted officials, exposing their discriminatory practices and demanding accountability. Eleanor. To an officer, we must acknowledge that there are systemic issues within our justice system that need to be addressed if we hope to truly create a safer society for all citizens. This case highlights just one aspect of those problems, the prevalence of police brutality against black people. The officer nods, taking notes as Emily continues her speech. INT. Police station. Day Emily describes how Johnny's death brought national attention to issues surrounding police violence and racial inequality in law enforcement. Her message resonated with many across the country, inspiring countless individuals to speak out against injustice and demand change. Eleanor, to a fellow officer, Johnny was not just an advocate for her community, but also an inspiration to all who witnessed her courage and dedication. She showed us that even in the face of adversity, we can stand up for what is right and fight for justice. The other officers nod in agreement as Emily continues. INT. Police Station. Day. Emily shares a letter she received from one of Johnny's supporters, expressing their admiration for her bravery and commitment to creating change within law enforcement. Leader. Dear name. Leader. To Emily. Your sister was an unwavering champion for justice in our community. Her dedication to fighting against racial profiling and police brutality inspired countless individuals like yourself to take action. Emily's eyes fill with tears as she reads the letter, her heart swelling with pride at Johnny's impact on others. INT. Police Station. Day. As Emily sits alone once again, reflecting on her sister's legacy, a thought crosses her mind. INT. City Hall. Day. The sun begins to set over the City Hall, casting a warm glow across the building as Emily walks towards Johnny's grave with a heavy heart. Emily, I know it may be difficult for you to hear this now, she says softly, looking down at her sister's stone marker. But I want you to know that your life was not in vain. She takes out another photo album and opens one of Johnny's favorite photographs from a protest they organized together. Emily, to herself, Johnny standing on the steps of City Hall, surrounded by a sea of people holding signs demanding accountability for police brutality. That photograph will always be etched in my heart. She looks at the photo again, tears streaming down her face as she turns to leave, leaving behind a trail of memories that serve as proof of Johnny's life and legacy. EXT, Rural Town. Day. Emily walks away from the church, feeling grateful for Johnny's memory and the impact she had on those around her. As she leaves the town and embarks on this new chapter in her journey towards justice, she knows that there is still much work to be done, but with each step forward, she remains determined to continue fighting against systemic issues of racial inequality within law enforcement and creating a world where every individual has access to justice. The sun rises over the horizon as Emily steps into the fresh morning air, her heart filled with hope and determination. With Johnny's memory in mind and the unwavering belief that every person has the power to make a difference, she begins this new chapter of her life, ready to confront any challenge that comes her way, fighting for justice and creating a brighter future for all citizens, regardless of race or ethnicity. EXT, Rural Town. Day. Emily walked away from the church, her heart heavy with grief and determination to continue fighting against systemic issues of racial inequality within law enforcement. She knew that Johnny's life had been cut short in a tragic accident, but she also remembered the impact he had on those around him. As she left the town, Emily was grateful for Johnny's memory and the countless lives he touched. As Emily walked down the main street, she couldn't shake off the feeling of injustice that permeated through every corner. The small towns were filled with hate and division, where people held deep-seated prejudices against minorities. It seemed like everyone had their own story to tell about how they felt overlooked or mistreated by law enforcement. Emily knew that Johnny's memory would serve as a beacon for justice in the face of such adversity. She imagined him standing tall at the local town hall, surrounded by community members and police officers from all walks of life. In his hand was a photo of her sister, holding hands with one of his own victims, who had been killed while trying to save Johnny. I remember that day, Emily said softly, looking out over the crowd. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong in our community. The way they treated our family and friends was just unacceptable. As she continued walking down the street, Emily encountered several individuals from her past who had also been victims of law enforcement brutality. They shared their stories with Emily, detailing how officers would relentlessly target minorities for no reason other than a racial bias or prejudice. One woman named Sarah spoke about an incident when Johnny was shot in his home while serving as a police officer. The officers were involved in a domestic dispute and had been on the scene to prevent violence from escalating. But when they arrived, they began targeting Sarah's husband and children, with Sarah being one of the few who survived. "It wasn't just about our lives," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "It was about our family's futures too. We were left wondering if we would ever see them again." Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of anger at what she saw in this community. It felt like everyone had become complacent with the status quo, content to wait for things to improve without taking action themselves. But Emily knew that Johnny's memory was more than just an individual case. He represented the collective struggle for justice and equality for all members of society. She imagined him standing at a rally, surrounded by diverse groups of people from different backgrounds, calling out for change and demanding accountability from law enforcement officials who had wronged them. "I want to bring attention to these issues," Emily said firmly. "We need to start having real conversations about race and police brutality in our communities. We can't just wait until something happens before we take action." As she walked down the main street, Emily's thoughts were driven by a sense of purpose and determination. She knew that it was only through collective effort that true change could be achieved. Emily arrived at her childhood home, where she had grown up in a small town filled with racism and discrimination. As she entered the house, the smell of freshly baked cookies wafted out from the kitchen, beckoning her inside. Dad sat at his usual spot on the couch, surrounded by stacks of newspapers and magazines. He looked up as Emily walked into the room, tears in his eyes. "I've been trying to think about what's left for Johnny," Dad said, breaking down in sobs. "I don't know how we'll make it without him." Emily knew that she couldn't solve this problem alone, but with her sister's memory and a growing sense of anger within the community, there was hope. "We have to start by acknowledging our own biases and prejudices," Emily said, standing up from the couch. "We need to learn how to treat people differently based on their race or ethnicity." Dad nodded in agreement, tears streaming down his face as he took her hand. "I know it's going to be difficult," Dad whispered, "but we have to do what we can to make a difference, even if it means starting small." Emily felt a sense of strength and purpose, knowing that she had the power to create change within this community. She knew that Johnny would never want her to give up, but he also understood the importance of standing up for justice. As they hugged each other goodbye, Emily couldn't help but feel grateful for the journey that lay ahead. With a heavy heart, she turned towards the direction of their shared future, determined to fight against systemic issues of racial inequality and create a world where every individual has access to justice. Emily left her hometown with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. She knew that Johnny's memory would continue to inspire others in her journey towards justice, serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right and fighting against injustice. With each step forward, she continued to build upon her sister's legacy, creating change within her community and beyond. As Emily walked down the main street once again, knowing that Johnny would always be with her in spirit, she felt a sense of hope and determination. She knew that anything was possible when people come together for a common cause, united by their shared desire to create a better future for all citizens, regardless of race or ethnicity. In the small town of Millfield, nestled in the rolling hills and surrounded by lush green forests, a man named Johnny lived his life with unwavering determination. Despite facing numerous challenges throughout his journey, including racism and discrimination from within the police force, he refused to give up on the fight for justice. As an elderly African-American resident, Johnny had witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of systemic issues that perpetuated racial inequality in America. In a small community where everyone knew each other's names, Johnny was known as a hard-working and compassionate individual who always put others before himself. He worked tirelessly to provide assistance to those in need, using his skills as a handyman to repair homes and businesses for the elderly and disabled. However, it wasn't until he found out that one of his beloved neighbors had been falsely accused of a crime that Johnny knew something was deeply wrong. On an evening stroll through the town park, Johnny noticed a group of police officers standing guard at the entrance to the lake's side, their faces stern and unwavering. As they approached him, he felt a sense of fear wash over him as he realized with horror that his sister, Emily, had been drowned in the tranquil waters. Johnny was shaken by the tragedy, but he knew that it wasn't just about her death. He remembered how she always encouraged others to stand up for what is right and fight against injustice, no matter how difficult or daunting the task might be. With a heavy heart, Johnny turned towards the direction of their shared future, determined to honor his sister's memory by taking action. As he walked down the main street, surrounded by curious onlookers who were shocked by the news of her sudden death, Johnny couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with emotions. He knew that Emily was not alone in this tragedy. Countless others had been affected by racism and discrimination during his lifetime. But now, it seemed like everyone was looking for a solution to these issues. Johnny's first step towards creating change within the police force came when he organized a community meeting to discuss ways to address racial profiling and bias among officers. He invited local residents, including those who had been victims of discrimination or injustice, to share their stories and concerns with other members of his community. In this meeting, Johnny listened intently as they spoke about the systemic issues that perpetuated racism in law enforcement, from biased training programs to discriminatory hiring practices. As he continued to raise awareness among the community, Johnny also worked on building relationships with local leaders who could help him make a difference. He reached out to the town council and demanded an investigation into Emily's death, hoping that they would take action to address the root causes of racial bias in law enforcement. But as the search for justice continued, Johnny faced numerous challenges. The police department was resistant at first, refusing to investigate until it received overwhelming evidence linking one officer to her death. This only fueled Johnny's determination to stand up for what is right and demand accountability from those responsible. Despite the resistance, Johnny refused to back down. He organized a fundraising event to raise awareness about racial bias in law enforcement and donate funds towards the investigation into Emily's death. As word spread, his community rallied behind him, coming together to support their beloved sister and fight for justice. Through this campaign, Johnny was able to secure funding from local organizations and businesses, which he used to fund an independent detective who would work on the case. They spent months interviewing witnesses, analyzing evidence, and gathering intelligence, ultimately leading them to a breakthrough in the investigation that proved beyond doubt the police officers responsible for Emily's death were guilty. The trial was long and grueling, with Johnny appearing as a witness alongside the police officers themselves. In court, he vividly recounted his sister's story, painting a picture of an officer who had been trained to use excessive force against African-American suspects, but instead used deadly tactics that led to her tragic death. As the jury deliberated over the verdict, it was clear that justice had finally been served in Millfield. The police officers were found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to prison terms ranging from 5 years to life imprisonment. Johnny's bravery and determination had not only brought closure for his sister, but also galvanized a community dedicated to fighting against racial injustice. With the trial behind him, Johnny knew that he was one step closer towards creating a world where every individual has access to justice. He continued to work on building relationships with local leaders who could help him make further progress in this fight, advocating for policies and practices that address systemic racism and discrimination within law enforcement. In Millfield, Johnny's legacy would continue to inspire others as they stood up against injustice and fought for a better future for all citizens. He had shown the world that even in the darkest of times, hope can be found when people come together for a common cause, united by their shared desire to create a brighter tomorrow. As he walked down the main street once again, surrounded by curious onlookers who were shocked by his sudden death, Johnny felt grateful for the journey that had led him there. He knew that Emily's memory would continue to serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right and fighting against injustice, no matter how difficult or daunting the task might be. But most importantly, he was proud to have brought justice back into his community, ensuring that those responsible for her death were held accountable and that others could learn from their mistakes. As Johnny looked out at the breathtaking view of the town park where Emily had spent so many happy hours with him, he knew that there would always be work to be done in order to create a world where every individual has access to justice, regardless of race or ethnicity. With each step forward towards this goal, Johnny felt a sense of hope and determination. He was proud to have made a difference, not only for the victims of racial injustice, but also for generations to come. And as he walked down that main street once again, knowing that Emily's memory would continue to inspire them, he knew that anything was possible when people come together for a common cause, united by their shared desire to create a better future for all citizens. In the small town of Millfield, Ohio, a grieving man named Johnny was determined to seek revenge against the police officers who had callously drowned his sister in a tranquil lake. His sister's death had left him shattered and lost, but he refused to let her memory be forgotten or forgotten. Johnny had always been an advocate for justice, fighting against injustice no matter how difficult or daunting it might seem. He knew that as the police officers responsible for Emily's drowning, they were guilty of a crime beyond measure, one that would haunt them forever. Despite his grief and anger, Johnny was determined to bring those responsible to justice, ensuring that their actions would be held accountable. As he stood in front of the picturesque town park where Emily had spent so many happy hours with him, Johnny couldn't help but feel a sense of hope wash over him. He knew that there would always be work to be done in order to create a world where every individual has access to justice, regardless of race or ethnicity. With each step forward towards this goal, Johnny felt a sense of determination. He was proud to have made a difference not only for the victims of racial injustice, but also for generations to come. And as he walked down that main street once again, knowing that Emily's memory would continue to inspire them, he knew that anything was possible when people come together for a common cause, united by their shared desire to create a better future for all citizens. But the road to justice wasn't easy. The police department had been plagued with corruption and malfeasance, and it seemed as though they were above the law at every turn. Johnny knew that he would have to prove them wrong in court if he wanted to bring the officers responsible to justice. He spent months researching their past behavior, gathering evidence of misconduct, and building a case against each one. The trial was long and grueling, with witnesses testifying against the police department's top officials at every turn. Johnny knew that this wouldn't be an easy task, but he remained steadfast in his determination to see justice served. As the prosecution presented their arguments, Johnny stood there, watching as they painted a picture of a corrupt force bent on using innocent people for personal gain. But no matter how convincing they tried to make it appear, Johnny refused to let them win. He spoke passionately about Emily's memory and her impact on his life, emphasizing the importance of standing up against injustice and fighting for what was right. In court, Johnny faced off against each police officer in a raw, emotional exchange that left both sides shaken. But despite their attempts at intimidating him, he remained resolute. He knew that this wasn't just about winning a trial. It was about sending a message to the entire department and inspiring others to do better. In the end, Johnny's efforts paid off. The police officers who had callously drowned Emily in the lake were found guilty of their crimes, and they were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 3 months to life in jail. As he left the courtroom, his heart heavy with relief but also filled with a sense of pride and accomplishment. Johnny knew that justice would never truly be achieved overnight, but as long as people like him continued fighting for what was right, it was possible to create a better future for all citizens. He walked down that main street once again, knowing that Emily's memory would continue to inspire them, and he vowed to keep pushing forward in his quest for justice, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. The global outline. Asterisk in this harrowing tale, a grieving man embarks on a chilling mission of vengeance after a group of bigoted police officers callously drown his sister in a tranquil lake. Asterisk each police officer in a raw, emotional exchange that left both sides shaken. But despite their attempts at intimidating him, he remained resolute. He knew that this wasn't just about winning a trial. It was about sending a message to the entire department and inspiring others to do better. Asterisk in the end, Johnny's efforts paid off. The police officers who had callously drowned Emily in the lake were found guilty of their crimes, and they were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 3 months to life in jail. As he left the courtroom, his heart heavy with relief but also filled with a sense of pride and accomplishment. Asterisk Johnny knew that justice would never truly be achieved overnight, but as long as people like him continued fighting for what was right, it was possible to create a better future for all citizens. He walked down that main street once again, knowing that Emily's memory would continue to inspire them, and he vowed to keep pushing forward in his quest for justice, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. Asterisk as he made his way through the bustling streets of town, Johnny couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The tension between him and the police officers was palpable, as they both knew what it meant to lose someone close to them. But even in these difficult circumstances, there were still people like Johnny who believed that justice could be achieved. Asterisk as he approached a small park on one side of town, Johnny noticed a group of officers standing outside a local bar. They had been monitoring him closely for weeks now, watching his every move and gathering intelligence about the case against Emily's killer. Their faces were twisted in anger and frustration as they listened to the verdict. Asterisk, this is it, one officer said, pointing at Johnny with a cold eye. We finally got you. Johnny felt a surge of determination well up within him as he knew that this was his chance to make things right. Asterisk, he walked over to them and stood in front of the group, holding their hands tightly. I want to clear my sister's name, he said with conviction. She didn't deserve to die like she did. The officers exchanged a few tense glances before nodding slowly. Johnny could see that they were beginning to believe him. Asterisk, we know what you've done for us, Johnny, one officer said, his voice shaking slightly. But we can only do so much at this point. You need the evidence and witnesses behind the crime, as well as a clear chain of command to prove your innocence. Johnny nodded slowly again, knowing that he was up against some tough odds. Asterisk as they left the park and continued their surveillance mission, Johnny couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. He knew that this case would take time to solve, but he also knew that he had a duty to do everything in his power to bring justice for Emily and her family. The next few weeks were a blur as Johnny worked tirelessly to gather evidence against the police officers responsible for drowning Emily in the lake. He talked with witnesses, interviewed suspects, and reviewed surveillance footage, hoping to find something that would prove their innocence. Finally, after months of hard work, Johnny received some crucial information that changed everything. The lead detective had discovered a secret meeting between two key members of the police force, where they discussed Emily's death in detail. They had known about her involvement with an illegal organization and were planning to frame someone else for the crime. Johnny, one officer said, his voice shaking slightly. "We need you on our team." Johnny hesitated at first, but he knew that this was his chance to make things right. He packed a briefcase full of evidence and headed back into town. As he approached the local bar where they had been monitoring him for weeks, Johnny felt a sense of relief wash over him as he saw them standing outside. They were looking at him with a mixture of fear and determination now, knowing that their lives hung in the balance if they failed to act quickly. Johnny, one officer said, his voice shaking slightly. "We need you on our team." Johnny hesitated for just a moment before nodding slowly again. He walked over to them and gave them a tight hug. "I trust your judgment, guys." "Thank you." The lead detective replied with a relieved smile. "It's been tough work, but we believe that justice will finally be served." Johnny couldn't help but feel proud of himself for taking on this dangerous mission, even though it had come at great personal cost. The next few days were tense as Johnny worked tirelessly to gather evidence against the police officers responsible for drowning Emily in the lake. He talked with witnesses, interviewed suspects, and reviewed surveillance footage, hoping to find something that would prove their innocence. Finally, after months of hard work, Johnny received some crucial information that changed everything. The lead detective had discovered a secret meeting between two key members of the police force, where they discussed Emily's death in detail. They had known about her involvement with an illegal organization and were planning to frame someone else for the crime. Johnny, one officer said, his voice shaking slightly. "We need you on our team." Johnny hesitated at first, but he knew that this was his chance to make things right. He packed a briefcase full of evidence and headed back into town. As he approached the local bar where they had been monitoring him for weeks, Johnny felt a sense of relief wash over him as he saw them standing outside. They were looking at him with a mixture of fear and determination now, knowing that their lives hung in the balance if they failed to act quickly. Johnny, one officer said, his voice shaking slightly. "We need you on our team." Johnny hesitated for just a moment before nodding slowly again. He walked over to them and gave them a tight hug. "I trust your judgment, guys." "Thank you." The lead detective replied with a relieved smile. "It's been tough work, but we believe that justice will finally be served." Johnny couldn't help but feel proud of himself for taking on this dangerous mission, even though it had come at great personal cost. The next few days were tense as Johnny worked tirelessly to gather evidence against the police officers responsible for drowning Emily in the lake. He talked with witnesses, interviewed suspects, and reviewed surveillance footage, hoping to find something that would prove their innocence. As he made his way through the bustling streets of town, Johnny couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The tension between him and the police officers was palpable, as they both knew what it meant to lose someone close to them. But even in these difficult circumstances, there were still people like Johnny who believed that justice could be achieved. As he approached a small park on one side of town, Johnny noticed a group of officers standing outside a local bar.